I'm David Chen. I'm here with Don Marshall, and we are going to tell you what you need to do to get ready for The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, premiering on Prime Video very shortly. So, Don Marshall, I'm a casual, and I am trying to think, hey, Rings of Power is going to be on the air this weekend. What do I need to do to prepare? Do I need to read any books? Do I need to watch anything? What do you think, Don?
Don't do anything. Podcast is over. Thank you all for coming. No, I'm
All
kidding.
right,
I'm
that's
kidding.
it.
No, but in all seriousness, anybody who is listening to this that either hasn't read the books or watched the movies once a bunch of years ago, please do not feel like you need to do a whole bunch of legwork or anything to understand all of the lore that goes into it. In fact, I recommend you don't, for the sole reason of there are so many different characters and so much lore, and me being who I am, I can't help but look at these, characters and say, well, that didn't happen like that, and wasn't she over here and they were over, and it's nitpicky, right? And for me, when I got into the Lord of the Rings, I watched the movies and that introduced me to the books. And I will always have the books and I will always have the movies, and they can be enjoyed separately. So for me and anybody else who is interested in getting into this that might not know about the lore, I would say go into it. Watch the first episode. If it catches your interest, awesome. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, right? It's not going to be able to please everybody. But then once you sort of get your feet wet with this show, yeah, check out the maybe rewatch the movies or rewatch the Hobbit trilogy or read a wiki or start reading the trilogy. Don't start with the Silmarillion though. I'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah. So let's start by talking about when does the Rings of Power take place in relationship to the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy?
Right. So assuming you have at least seen or heard of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, that story takes place in the Third Age of Middle-earth. And the Third Age of Middle-earth is 3,019 years long. So this series is going to take place in the Second Age. So roughly 3,000 years before that. I will give one caveat, though, and this is a decision made by the showrunners and the executives that I actually agree with. This will be a compressed timeline for everything that happens in the Second Age. It happens over the course of 3,341 years. But Tolkien has no problem doing a hop, skip, and a jump in one sentence to skip over 500 of those years, basically saying, and there was much prosperity and the people flourished. And that makes for very boring storytelling. So what we are likely going to see, based on my, educated guesses, we'll probably see a bunch of the stuff that happens in the Second Age that are maybe a few hundred, if not 1,000 years apart, meshed together in one sort of story that is segmented sort of all in one. So you're looking at about 3,000 years before the start of the original trilogy.
Now, if people wanted to do something to familiarize themselves with the world, what do you think is the most important thing they can do to have some sense of what's happening before they watch The Rings of Power?
Yeah, most important thing you could probably do is rewatch the movies. That's probably going to give you a feel for the universe, what it's lived in, and really what you can do from there. Is because the movies is 9.5 hours of your time. Is get involved in the community. I never really recommend people dive into the Silmarillion or immediately go read the books. Check out the community first. And this may seem like a shameless plug, but I promise you I am not the only Tolkien content creator out there, thankfully. There are cosplayers and academics, and there is Gay Hobbit Twitter. If any of you are interested in that, the queer community has latched on to the Lord of the Rings in a way I never thought possible, and I'm so happy to see that. But there really is, thank goodness, a thriving community of Tolkien fans, even so many years after his passing.
Hobbit trilogy less important to catch up, you think?
Yeah, the Hobbit trilogy, I know lots of people have different opinions on the Hobbit trilogies that have seen them. They stretched one book into 3 movies. I like them for what they are, but in terms of importance to the story, not so much. There are a couple of references that you may hear in the Hobbit trilogies, like where Bilbo's sword is from, which is a city called Gondolin that existed in the First Age. That might get brought up in the TV show, but there's very little lore dump that you're going to get to sort of understand this show from the Hobbit trilogy.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, well, let's say I'm not a casual Don Marshall. Let's say I really want all the facts and knowledge at my fingertips. What are the things you'd recommend me check out before I watch The Rings of Power?
From a book perspective, start with the trilogy or start with The Hobbit. From there, you'll get introduced to Tolkien's world, his writings, the dialogue, how he sort of crafts his world. And then once you've sort of read The Hobbit or you've read the trilogy, you kind of have free reign. And that is kind of a dangerous thing to have because the way that Tolkien's books were released was so different than any other author, I think. And that is thanks to his son, Christopher Tolkien, who released many of his notes and, full-fledged stories that he had written but never published in a book called the Silmarillion. And if you've never heard of the Silmarillion before, it is basically Tolkien's version of the Bible. You get literally the origin story of the god of Tolkien's universe, whose name is Eru Ilúvatar, to a recap of everything that happens in the original trilogy. And the whole book is, I think, 300-ish pages long, contains all of that.
So the trilogy of books, The Hobbit, and the Silmarillion in that order probably is what you'd recommend.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. From there, you're on your own. I wouldn't even know where to begin. If you've gone that far, you already know 90% of what's in my head. You've absorbed it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I am curious, as we're approaching Rings of Power, and we're not going to really spoil any plot developments that happen in that show, but are there any characters people should be on the lookout for if they are rewatching the original trilogy of films to get ready?
Yes. So anyone who has maybe even seen a trailer or a promotional poster for this Rings of Power show is going to notice that Galadriel is there and Elrond is there. Those are, I think, the two characters that whatever marketing team is doing this is kind of focused on, with a couple of others off to the side, right?
Elrond is the Hugo Weaving character
Yes.
who's an elf in the original trilogy, right?
Yes, sorry. I get sidetracked with that sort of thing.
It's all good. Galadriel is Kate Blanchett, if I'm recall correctly.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. And so they're both elves in the world.
They are, yes. So Hugo Weaving's character of Elrond is going to play an important role, as well as Kate Blanchett's character Galadriel. They are played by different people. Galadriel is played by actress named Morvith Clark, and Elrond is played by an actor named Robert Aramayo, who you may know, David, as young Ned Stark in the Game of Thrones, that brief flashback in, I think it was season 7 at the Tower.
Excellent. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Elrond and Galadriel, both elves, and both very much on opposite sides of this this idea that the evil has been defeated. So I'm very interested to see what their dynamic is, because we don't really get a scene of them together in the movies. We have a very weird, like, telepathic conversation, but it's very one-sided. Kate Blanchett's Galadriel is only speaking. So I'm very, very excited to see if they will be in any scenes together.
Gotcha. Now, my understanding is that Amazon only has rights to The Hobbit, the trilogy of books and films, and also the appendices of the trilogy. So one thing I had originally asked you was, well, those have already been made into movies. So how does The Rings of Power have any new material?
Right.
What is the answer to that question, Don?
So it's multifaceted, and just to quickly clarify, they have the rights to the books, but if I'm remembering correctly, I believe Warner Brothers still owns the rights to the movies. However,
yes.
I don't think Amazon is anywhere near dumb enough to try and remake arguably one of the best trilogies of all time. That being said, because they have the rights to these books, there are little bits and pieces of lore that you can grab from the original trilogy and from The Hobbit that can create a story. They also have the rights to the appendices at the end of The Return of the King, which is basically a timeline of all of the major stuff that happens in the First and Second Age. Now, it's not as fleshed out as, say, what appears in the Silmarillion, which has, I want to say, 40 to 50 pages of, backstory, but a lot of it is, major events. The prologue we see in the first Fellowship of the Ring movie, where they're fighting on Mount Doom and they're trying to defeat Sauron, that's in the appendices. And so that's a whole lore drop in itself.
Yeah. So basically, they're taking these mentions of lore from the appendices for the end of the trilogy and kind of blowing them up and expanding on them and telling full stories based off of them.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so they have the rights to the appendices. They don't have rights to the Silmarillion, which theoretically covers the same material, though. Is that
It
accurate?
Yes, it does cover the same material. But I will say this: while it would be nice for them to have the Silmarillion, I'm not necessarily worried about the fact that they don't. The Silmarillion is, how do I put this nicely? Not exciting reading. It's very dry. It's very boring. It has a kind of, and on the year 3000, King Armaganda had this to say to this, and then 500-year time skip, and his son. Like, it's not, like, good prose if you're used to someone like George R.R. Martin or Brandon Sanderson or Patrick Rothfuss. He's got a very distinct style. And while it would be nice to have, like, the little tidbits of story, I don't think it's going to play that huge of a role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. Interesting. So it'll be interesting to see like how much they can expand on the world given the stuff that they have. Um, they have access to the books, not the movies. They have access to the appendices, and they're going to try to tell stories based off of that. Like, given that that is the pool of things they're pulling from, do you feel like there's a lot there, Don, or do you feel like they're trying to, you know, draw a lot from very few mentions?
Everything I have seen so far leads me to think they're not trying to draw this out too much. I felt that way with the Hobbit movies. I think the Hobbit probably could have been 2 movies, potentially 1, and they could have cut a lot of the filler. But I think for what I have seen so far, what we know right now is it's planned on being 5 seasons. And what they may try and do is kind of fill in the gaps of the world that Tolkien built using the appendices. So just to kind of give you an idea, right? There's not a lot talked about or written about from Galadriel's point of view, right? She and Celeborn are hanging out. They're just kind of doing their thing, right? Um, but to give some agency to these characters, and with this timeline compression, I really think that a meaningful story can be told. And again, I was lucky enough to see the first 2 episodes. No spoilers, obviously, but from what I have seen, I think there is a sense of world building and development, and a storytelling with some expediency, with some agency. Right? It's one of Tolkien's main themes. Evil is everywhere, and the forces of good must fight to make their world a peaceful one.
I think people have a good sense of what they need to do to prepare. Uh, Number one, you don't need to do anything. Number two, if you want to, rewatch the movies. And number three, read the books, basically. That's in descending order
Yes.
what you should probably do if you want to get ready for The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Anything else you want to mention, Don Marshall?
Oh, goodness. Well, if you like what I have to say in this very brief preview of what I hope will be the most successful Rings of Power podcast ever, you can find me on all social media platforms at Don Marshall72. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. I also have a Patreon if you really, really like my stuff. I post a lot of bonus content there, behind the scenes stuff. We do live streams. I'm trying to do some trivia with my followers there. So if you think you can stump me or beat me in a quiz, hats off to you. Come on over to Patreon and check that out. But otherwise, Don Marshall72 across all social media.
And how this show will work is recaps of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power will be released on the main Decoding TV feed, which you can find at podcast.decodingtv.com. That feed is free and available to anyone. Of course, we'll also be posting these as videos on YouTube at decodingtv.com/YouTube, and we'll be posting clips at decodingtv.com/TikTok. You can also become a paid member of Decoding TV at decodingtv.com, where you can get ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus episodes that Don Marshall and I will record for you. Of course, you can also get ad-free episodes and exclusive bonuses of A Cast of Kings as well. So check out decodingtv.com to support this podcast and help make it possible. All right. Until then, the next time you're going to hear from us is on Saturday, when we release our first recap for the first 2 episodes of The Rings of Power, which are debuting this week. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you're having a great time pre-gaming for Lord of the Rings. And we'll see you for our very first review of The Rings of Power episodes 1 and 2.
Bye-bye.